Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Water is one of those sectors that hides in plain sight, essential, enormous, and quietly full of complexity. And very few people have done more over the last decade to help the world take it seriously than our own Tom Ferguson. From shaping the earliest conversations around water risk, to building global platforms for entrepreneurs through Imagine H2O, to building Virgin Island Ventures as the first venture firm dedicated exclusively to water, Tom has been a consistent force in defining what this industry can become. And milestones are useful moments to pause and ask first principle questions. So for the 50th episode of The Fundamental Molecule, Steve Kloos and I decided to do something special. We flipped the mic. This episode covers a lot of ground with Tom, Steve, and myself. We cover Charlie Munger, fat tails, the culture bees, the Burn Island, and keeping the main thing the main thing.
Please enjoy our conversation with Tom Ferguson.
So Tom, on behalf of your two partners, thank you for trusting us with your podcast.
It's really fun and slightly daunting to do it this way round. It's a lot easier asking questions of people, but both of you have been guests, so I guess it's payback time.
Exactly, Tom. We've been waiting.
That's right.
All right, let's dive into it. Listeners will notice that we will be using some Tomisms throughout the podcast today. In light of that, one of the things that you use, the phrases you use to work with startups as well as internally is keeping the main thing the main thing. So right now, you've got 2 seed funds raised successfully. You've got a growth fund taking shape. The past, since 2021 now, 100 million assets under management under your belt. So with all that, what is the main thing for you, Tom, in 2026?
I think probably from the outside, it would be quite easy to surmise that there are so many things going on. Not only is it quite difficult to select the main one, but then to keep the main one, I guess, is the sort of inference. I think we're pretty good as a team at maintaining focus on where we need to be. But I suppose all of the framework of running a fund can be broken down into the 4 areas of finding, picking, winning, and supporting the companies, because out of that is where all of the LP value, which is our job in the end, is the returns that we provide to the people who fund us. And I think you probably agree that we're pretty good at finding, both inbound and outbound. We've certainly got a good track record in winning the deals that we've been a part of. And so if I had to kind of choose, it would definitely be around the picking still, in the backside of Fund 2 and into the growth fund, just making sure we keep that inbound quality really, really high. Mercifully, as you know, the decisions that we're making are really, really hard at the margin. And then, obviously I don't need to tell you two this, but we are very much hard at work in supporting the companies, make sure that we're not people who just roll up with a check and then sort of disappear into the hinterland. Our job is to make sure that we really deliver on our value proposition beyond what that check is. Sometimes that's easier with some than others. But overall, it's such a pleasure to work on behalf of these founders. So yeah, picking and supporting at the moment, I guess, even though that's 2 things, not 1.
Let's talk about why the growth fund, why now? And launching a growth fund now must feel a lot to you like it did in 2020 when you saw the opportunity, really the gap in the market for an early stage VC. So you left Imagine H2O and started Burn Island Ventures. So what are the parallels you see with the moment now and the moment back then?
I really don't want this to sort of sound self-congratulatory, but we really called our shot in 2020. And Steve, you were a supporter then, and Christine, you were obviously on the investment committee for Fund 1 when it started. But we really said, look, we think that there's a fairly clear direction that's going to transpire over the coming years. And the right time to invest money in order to take advantage of that direction of the market is now. Let's build an argument and go and ask people to go and see if they want to fund what we think is going to happen in the world. And mercifully, and every time I think about this and talk about it, I've got to knock on all the available pieces of wood because, the future is nothing if not complicated. But I think pretty much everything that we expected to be true, from the quality of the founders to the tailwinds to the market to regulatory change, public sentiment, things breaking, things being built for the first time, pretty much everything that we thought was going to be true is true. So in terms of the growth fund, I was trying to frame it like with everything. Fund one was an entrepreneurial opportunity. There was a gap in the market. There was a value proposition to be provided to a market, obviously between the founders and the LPs. And now it's just exactly the same thing. The founders that we saw in 2020 and we invested in 2021 and 2022 have, to a large extent, built the companies that they said they would, which is great. I mean, only one of ours has gone out of business. We've got a less than 2% loss ratio. But that means that they've graduated into the Series B, and in some cases, the Series C will have, 4 of those Series Cs done before the midpoint of this year. And as if by magic, there was no seed fund in 2020, and now there's no seed fund at the Series B. And so it feels as bloodless as it did in 2020. This feels as, again, obviously you agree, otherwise you wouldn't be here. It feels as obvious as it did in 2020. The market is misappraising these opportunities. These founders are world-class. These businesses are absolutely brilliant. And the other thing that's really helpful is that the exit market has already woken up way before the rest of the growth funding industry has, in certain cases anyway. So yeah, I mean, it's just really fun to go multi-stage earlier than we thought we would. When the entrepreneurial opportunity is there and you have the opportunity to build the team between a partnership like ours and then obviously Marissa and Jenny and Jessica and all the rest of the team behind us, then yeah, just go get it. Go and provide that product to the LPs in support of the founders who, so far still want to work with us, which is great.
How is BIV evolving as we move to these higher AUMs and a little bit investing later in the growth cycle?
Well, obviously, you need to have the capabilities to be able to work with companies that are going later in the growth cycle. But I think, we've got that internally. Obviously, Steve, yourself, your track record of working with companies at a variety of stages. Christine, you've gone all the way through to the exit. My end is very high, but obviously a slightly different sort of sphere of experience, I guess, operationally within companies. But I think what's helpful, again, this is why this feels bloodless. It doesn't feel like a leap, is that the experience that we have when you're investing at the early growth stage, you have more data. But it's really a function of marginal decision-making. Obviously, it's really important because the decision-making is obviously devolved into leadership teams that by the time we come in at the growth fund is hired by the CEO. But we're still divining the quality of the decisions at the margin. It's just how well have you hired and what do we think about the people who have hired and their ability to make decisions in terms of the building of the companies that we're going to be investing in. And then obviously, downstream capital needs and all the rest of the stuff that goes into the growth side of things. But the evolution is, I feel like it's sort of on pause at the moment, because one of the things that we really wanted to do, I think, when we were certainly raising Fund 2 and going into the growth fund, is that we wanted to build the team to be able to deliver the value prop for both of these, and frankly, all 3 of these funds before we went to raise them. There's nothing, I think, probably less attractive from the point of view of an LP, which is like, somebody turning up saying, yeah, just give me a whole load of AUM and I'm going to make great hiring decisions at the margin. Having us as a partnership and being able to point to both of you as I've gone through, a lot of these fundraising conversations has been the unlock that I knew it would be. And it means that we're just in a position to be able to do what we say we're going to do now. And there will be evolutions to come. We always want to make sure that we're not sitting on our laurels and making sure that there are evolutions and iterations to make sure that we are being iteratively excellent as one of the culture be. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess we're at a stage where we're comfortable with I feel comfortable with what we need to do, and we'll see what the coming years bring.
It's so interesting, Tom. It's like you kind of weave in and out of what we do as far as providing entrepreneurial and company support. And then at the same time, this enterprise itself is just so entrepreneurial. And the fact that we're iterating and building and weaving in this. And I didn't know that when I joined Burnt Island. This is an incredibly entrepreneurial enterprise in and of itself, as evidenced by kind of your storytelling. So
it's funny, isn't it? We're building the plane as we're flying. We're sort of doing the same thing as our founders are doing.
yeah.
Just have a very different business.
Well, one of the things that is so interesting about, I think, what you've built with Burnt Island, what we've happily supporting and joining in on and sort of co-building with you is just the idea, though, of narrative, storytelling, brand. I wonder if a little bit kind of your philosophy on why brand is important. We all know, those of us that are in the water sector know that things such as storytelling, design, brand are not the things that we boast about. So maybe just your philosophy on that. Why do you think it's so important and how are you leveraging it for Burnt Island?
It's so important. So the phrase, those who tell the stories rule the world, is a paraphrase of a quote from Plato, as well as a Native American proverb. It's as close to a universal truth as you come to, just in terms of kind of the execution of things that go on in the world. Stories are incredibly powerful because it's the way in which we make sense of the world, and it's the way in which we kind of coalesce around meaning. And that's as true from building our children's moral framework from when they're very, very young, all the way to this is why I'm going to be able to make a meaningfully positive difference in your life while you are running this water utility. You know, people need frameworks of understanding to be able to hang things on. And, you know, the vast proportion, especially as I was sort of growing up in this from kind of 2015 onwards, was look at the thing I built and just buy it because it's great. And there was always a deficit. You know, when you're looking at the sort of archetype pieces of storytelling, whether you're thinking about the 1984 Apple ads or kind of any Nike advert, even just, you know, Tesco in the UK or John Lewis's Christmas adverts, right? If you want to be good in any business, no matter how quote unquote boring, you're always going to have an advantage if you have an ability to tell your story. And really what that means is it's just an abstraction of your value proposition. If you're doing utility software for billing like Current R, or what Joe's doing at Crew Carbon in terms of all sorts of biochemical stuff within the wastewater treatment process itself, but the provision of an extra revenue line, the person who can best articulate that value proposition will always have a huge advantage over someone that can't. And so it's a fundamental source of edge. And it's a sustainable source of edge because it's quite hard to teach. You can learn it. You can learn it, but the people who get it instinctually have a really interesting advantage over those people who do have to learn. And then the other thing that's implied by the question, right, is that there are all sorts of different languages in which this is done. You know, the language to people who you'd want to hire is one. The language that you use with your customer is another. And the language that you use with investors, right, if you're taking the three people who it's commonly sort of like you have to articulate the story to, you have to understand the subtleties between them. But then you've also got the language of product, and that's the design aspect. How do you build a good product in order to move the value proposition from promise into reality as effectively and efficiently as you possibly can? And that's the, you know, user interface, user experience, all this stuff that is reams and reams and reams and reams of insight that have been published on it. So I guess then it's like, why is it important for us? And I think for us, you know, the story that we tell in the world explicitly and implicitly, the most important part of our brand is what people say when, you know, the doors are shut and no one else is listening. You know, are we people that you want to work with? So actually a really critical part of our brand is executing on our value proposition, is delivering the value to the founders that we promised on the way in. And so we make sure as Blazes that we're going to be able to actually like deliver on that. And if people do say good things about you, when the doors are shut and no one is listening, then good things tend to happen. But there are so many different kind of versions of this, so many stories that can be told. But the last thing I'll say is that I think what we've done reasonably well, I think, is to do it with a sense of authenticity, because we never publish anything on the blog that has been written with AI, for example. You know, it's our voice, whether it's Jenny's awesome series on exactly what we're looking for in startups, or obviously all the stuff that we've published, the pieces that we do on why we invested in. It's not us regurgitating, you know, X, Y, Z that our $1 trillion intern did. You know, we're sitting down and we're making sure that our voice is heard. And I think that's really important, but obviously multi-partite. But I find it all fascinating because communication is really hard and totally vital.
Storytelling is super important. Your brand is great. You do a great job at it. And all the world is a stage, really. And you are an actor with acting experience. How has that shaped who you are and who you are as an investor in our firm?
Oh my God. Well, you can tell how good an actor I was by the fact that I no longer do it as a job. Not that I ever really did it as a job anyway. Yeah. if you lurk on the BBC website, you can dig up a couple of radio plays.
But it's been really formative for you. It's in your fabric, in
Yeah.
us. Yeah. So it shaped you.
Yeah. It was a really foundational sort of piece of time, particularly in university. I think there are a couple of things that are really surprising that are very useful about who's sort of like doing the whole acting thing. One of them really weirdly is technical rehearsals. Technical rehearsals are really important because they take ages and they involve you having to go literally from movement to movement. So entry, then where do you go? And where is the light going to hit you? And then the light needs to be done. And then what are you going to do with this prop? Where is that prop? Where's the prop coming from? Where's it stored to make sure that it's in the right place when you're getting onto the stage? And it takes ages, but it's the specificity and the degree of detail to make the thing happening on stage look like it's kind of very easy. It's like the metaphor of the swan, right? It's all very kind of elegant and whatever. And underneath it's paddling like hell. This is really kind of what every, I think, founder is trying to do. The other one is that it is quite an extreme form of teamwork. Every time you're going out onto a stage, you're literally stepping out over the ledge. Like no one's going to die. Well, unless something goes really wrong, no one's going to die. It's not that high stakes, but human beings don't like being humiliated. It's one of these things that we are really, really scared of as people. And every time you go out on a stage, you are literally staring humiliation in the face, which has been very helpful for me to kind of, I think, get rid of the fear of humiliation. As anybody who's seen me with a mic in my hand is aware of this, that I'm okay with getting rid of it. But it's an extreme form of teamwork because when you're out there, you are really relying live in real time with people to make sure that you avoid humiliation, which I think is really cool. And then the last thing is that every single play is entrepreneurial, especially if you're doing it kind of like undergrad or at the Edinburgh Fringe. It's all a little product. It lasts for a month or 2 months or whatever it is. But you've got to build it. You've got to design it. You've got to market it. You've got to go and find an audience. You've got to sell tickets. You've got to deliver the value proposition. You've got to scare up the reviews. You've got to do all of this commercial stuff around it that was a very, very helpful grounding. Yeah, I would recommend it. If anybody's really interested in this, I would definitely recommend it. But I know it's a bit hackneyed, but if you haven't gone to do an improvisation, there's even kind of like 10 sessions at your local whatever. Just go and understand what that discipline kind of means, because it's this idea of trusting your brain in real time, which is a phenomenally helpful thing to know and understand. I'm very grateful, but yeah, it didn't go well. Otherwise I'd still be doing it.
Now we'll switch gears a little bit, talk about investment reality in water. Tom, you often talk about fat-tailed portfolio construction, that it's more fitting for us investing in the water sector versus typical Silicon Valley power law investing, where you're hoping for 1 to 2 unicorns out of a portfolio. Maybe the rest of the companies go belly up, and that's how you get returns. Can you explain what fat-tailed means and how it shapes our approach to investing?
If you imagine every portfolio, so you've got a portfolio of kind of 60 companies, which is the usual seed-stage portfolio construction. It's kind of a vertiginous cliff followed by a very long tail of things that don't go very far off the x-axis at all. What you have is a whole load of bad stuff being made up for by some very, very high bars on the left or right-hand end, depending on which way you want to construct it. But the stuff that wins in the sort of common and received wisdom of this game, it has to massively outbalance the stuff that doesn't. Well, I really sort of mulled this over as I was working in Imagine H2O. And obviously both of you are intrinsically involved in that organization as well. Still, we all still are. They do amazing work. But what I saw was that we actually had a really, really high survival rate. Not everyone's sort of shooting the lights out and like whatever it is. But by the time I'd left, it's maintained it, even after 6 more years. It's maintained it. It's about an 85% survival rate, which suggested to me that we had a mode of company appraisal there. And, we've since developed it at BIV. That's quite good at building companies that have good bone, that can stick around in this business. And over time, and obviously you don't have infinite time in a VC fund, you've kind of got a 10-year time horizon, depending on kind of what's going on. But really the wisdom is a 10-year time horizon. So it can't take forever to compound. But I always thought the idea of selecting for a portfolio construction where you're totally fine with 80% of your portfolio essentially going out of business was insane. And especially in water, like with massive deadweight loss to society. Like if somebody's building something, it's usually a reason for it. You want these companies, even if they don't get big, to stick around. And so there were various kind of corollaries of this in terms of how we thought about portfolio construction. But it always struck me that there are the outliers like lowercase fund 1 and USV fund 2 and a lot of Sequoia's funds and all this kind of stuff that do massive multiples. But they are literally 1 in 1,000. And that if you're an investor, if somebody can give you a 3x net return, so mid-20s in the IRR, you're going to invest with them all day long and twice on Sunday. Like, this is going to be a totally outlier position in your portfolio. So it always struck me that was sort of the job. It's not 24x. It would be great if you can turn up a 24x, but if you can do 3x net, and then it just becomes a question of the maths to be able to deliver that. And I thought that if we had an 85% survival rate at Imagine H2O, and if we just maintain that, then actually your winners don't have to be as big if you're deriving value from deeper into the portfolio. So you get a kind of a flatter shape. If you go back to those bar charts, you can bring down the wins because, like, is there going to be an Airbnb of water? I hope so. It would be great if there's, something nuts or like the open AI of water. But, you really actually want those outliers to be somewhere in the, we're just seeing now in the market, like 300, 400 million for our entry prices. That essentially is the same kind of home run as other funds would do. So just mathematically, it made a huge amount of sense to me that you can derive the returns you need to in a very different portfolio construction. That portfolio construction also means that you can concentrate in fewer companies with confidence that overall the maths is still going to work without having to do the 60 bets in order to find the two unicorns. So you could concentrate this all because of your degree of confidence in the stickability of the companies that you're investing in. It's a little bit different. It also wasn't completely novel. There were other people around, especially in the kind of late teens, that were doing sort of similar stuff online that I feel like they're very much derived from. But so far, so good. I mean, again, we've got a sub 2% loss ratio, one company in 5 years. And so, look, it's all going to come out in the wash in the next 5. We'll see where the returns come. But I mean, we all know that the position that Fund 1's in is really quite good. And Fund 2, if anything, is in a better position.
One thing that has been really impressive for me to watch you is your voracious, almost insatiable appetite for thought leadership and the people that really are the best in their categories across business, the amount of books you read, the podcasts that you listen to. You just have this crazy appetite for really wanting to learn from the best and benchmarking against the best. And one of those people is Charlie Munger. You're a huge admirer. And his thinking and mental models show up everywhere at Burn Island Ventures. What is it about Munger that resonates so deeply with?
Yeah, it's so funny. You just transported me back to when you sort of like first wandered around in the depths of Twitter. I wasn't really on Twitter at grad school, but when I did get onto it during my first job afterwards, because there was a little bit of downtime and nobody really wanted to talk to me, but there was a little bit of time to go and explore the podcasts of the world and to like wander around on Twitter. And I'd always heard obviously I knew who Warren Buffett was, but Charlie Munger's name kept on coming up. And so I bought Poor Charlie's Almanac on the advice of pretty much everybody that I was seeing in this sort of subculture of Twitter. And I remember it's too heavy to hold up as a book normally in bed. So I kind of had to be on my stomach reading this coffee table book. And he was such a great communicator. He didn't give a monkey's what anybody thought of him. He was a total iconoclast. I mean, to a fault, really. I imagine he's quite a difficult man to know. But really funny, really smart, really clear, not a wasted word. And, the light bulbs really came on with, which a lot of people do when they start like looking into Munger stuff, is his classic speech to Harvard in what it was, 2000, I think, The Psychology of Human Misjudgment. It's basically 24 ways in which we think badly. And he loves this idea of inversion, which is, I think it was a French mathematician had the phrase, always invert when met with a problem. That what you're looking for is not the pursuit of brilliance. Like what you're looking to eliminate is all the ways in which brilliance cannot be achieved. And in the most kind of intense level, right, is that if you can just avoid, death or failure or all of the ways in which failure becomes much more likely, then actually you massively increase your likelihood of success. And that really resonated with me because coming out of grad school, one of the things that is really bad, I think, about a lot of grad schools is that it's almost impossible to escape the herd mentality. And that there is this idea, implicit, but sometimes explicit, that there is a right way of doing things, that there's something that you should be shooting for, that there is a kind of an apotheosis out there that you should be shooting towards. And I just didn't know what that was. I found that very, very uncomfortable, and all of the normal pathways just didn't seem attractive. So I felt very lost. But finally, somebody introducing me to this idea that the way to build a kind of a career and a life, I guess, is about the exclusion of stuff that you don't want to do. Is the pursuit of the scientific method. Just test and iterate, test and iterate, test and iterate. Find out about your reality, your taste. So it started there with a personal thing in terms of the sort of my kind of marginal decisions in terms of the stages of my career. And then over time, I realized that pretty much everything he was talking about could be applied to startups. Now, it's really weird, right? Because Berkshire does a great job of buying huge quantities of Apple and insurance companies and Occidental and doesn't do a lot of venture investing. But I think if you read Poor Charlie's Almanac in the Snowball, which is the biography of Warren Buffett, you can isolate essentially, I think, almost all of the really important ideas of all company building. And we spend way too much time thinking about the whole new thing and like agents in AI and all this kind of stuff, like, which is going to be important and you've got to be across it. But there is real timeless wisdom about building companies, building yourself as people, the way in which you navigate the marginal decisions, the way it's really easy to fool yourself. You are the easiest person to fool. I just think he's such an inspirational guy, and I'm so sad there's no way I would have been able to meet him. Very oddly, my cousin's wife went to prom with his son. That's the closest I got. Hillary, the wonderful Hillary Bayback in Santa Barbara. She told me this and that she couldn't understand why I completely freaked out.
So that's not the typical celeb crush, Tom.
Exactly. Yeah. Some like nonagenarian geezer in like Santa Barbara. Yeah.
So instead of trying to be great, you invert and be consistently not stupid, which Christine, as we know, is one of our culture beats.
Yes, it is. Aw, what a segue, Steve. Thank you. Well, Tom, one of the fun things about starting a company is you get to like lay the groundwork for culture and many other things. And so as we're kind of digging into the history of Tom Ferguson, one of the things we all love are what we call here at Bird Island Ventures our culture bees, the bees, the buzz, BEEZZZZ. And we live by these on a day-to-day basis in a sector, that being a venture, that is not always known for following the most proper moral course. But for us, these are what we live by. I'll say it. There are stories, Tom. So my question about the culture bees, and I'll read a couple of them, is not so much of like, why do we have these? But maybe if you could just tell like a quick story about where it came from that might be really interesting. I think one of them that Steve just said, we know, be consistently not stupid. We got that one. I'll let you pick because I think you might have some fun ones about where these come from in your life.
So yeah, they're called the bees because each of them start with the word be, as in go and do something. We wanted them to be active when we started these. So that's the sort of segue. First things first, right, is be the queen in...
I like the one about your mother, so I was hoping you'd pick that one.
He's the queen in the kitchen. So yeah, my mum, very encouraging when the first cultural thing starts with like the founder's mum. This is what I wasn't very, I'm definitely not going to listen to this, so it's okay. What she said to me very early, and it was a very kind compliment to me because she thought I was one of them, but she likes people who know where to put themselves in the kitchen. Because when you think about the kitchen is actually a very complicated operating environment. There is all sorts of stuff that's happening to a deadline all the time. And as you're going through it, entropy is real, right? Everything is sort of exploding and getting more messy, and a finite space is getting more difficult to operate in as you're hitting a deadline. And it's exactly the point at which it shouldn't be hard to operate in. And so you actually need to be quite good at seeing all of these variables and acting on. It's a sort of a weirdly involved and I think very helpful overall metaphor. And it always just sort of struck me. And then it sort of was joined together with, in series 1 of The Wire, which I love as a TV show. I just think it's an absolutely phenomenal portrait of a city and it's an amazing piece of writing. Apart from Dominic West's accent, which is crap, but no one noticed that. And everyone was like, this guy's not from Baltimore at all. Like, he's definitely an Etonian, which is what he is. These guys are sitting outside a project in Baltimore and they're sitting on a couch and one of them is teaching the other one to play chess. And he refers to the Queen as the get shit done piece, which I just thought was great because that's exactly what the Queen is. It just like bounces around the board and it just can do everything. And it just sort of crushes. It's this great metaphor. And I thought when you combine those ideas with somebody that has the subtlety of mind and the ability to look at a complex environment, to understand what needs to be done, usually without being asked, like the potato peelings need to go in the bin. That needs to be washed up. The stuff that's in the drying rack needs to be dried up and put away in the right place. that needs to be stirred. This needs to be moved to a different heat, all of this stuff. But if you have this idea of being able to look around corners and a predilection to action, what you have is something really, really powerful in any kind of team member. And it's certainly something that all of these things are things that I aspire to. So even when it was just me in a kind of an IKEA chair, I wrote these down as just something that I wanted to do. So that's kind of be the queen in the kitchen. The other one, be where the puck is going is classic kind of Gretzky. He scored a load of goals because he skated to where the puck was going to go rather than where the puck was. And that's maybe less surprising. But the one I've always really like is being an M maximizer. One of the reasons why interviews are really stupid, and I do think that interviews are really stupid, a very, very bad way of assessing whether or not people should join your team, is because they assess for where people are now. But actually the thing that's difficult and much more important, because graphically, if you think about this, if you find somebody that's got great experience and skills now, but improves at a lower rate, so there's a sort of a shallow line going across the graph. If you can find someone who has fewer skills or less sort of fancy resume or like whatever it is, but has a very, very high rate of learning, they're actually going to cross the person with their line is going to cross the person with a shallower rate of learning really quite quickly if you do it graphically. This is something that you should always solve for, I think, in terms of hiring, is people who can just be learning machines. And then once you're on board, that job doesn't finish, right? And I think it's one of the things that's really hard to do is to make sure that you're continuously being a learning machine and onboarding new information and finding information from areas that don't necessarily fit. And what can we learn from fintech or space technology or whatever that is applicable to what we're doing in water? But this idea of the most important thing is maximizing the M, the slope of the curve, rather than its intercept with the y-axis. It's a really important one, not only for finding people, but for when people are in your team.
Yeah. And I think of our entrepreneurs. We're meeting our entrepreneurs and our founders at the beginning, sometime towards what we think of at the beginning of their journey. And it's something we absolutely have to appraise. Like, that learning cycle is insane, what you have to go through to keep company building. And it's hard.
We have literally days to make a decision. You have the breadcrumbs of some things, like the track record of decision making, exactly how they articulate themselves. This is why, obviously, the written side of things, people are always sort of wondering why we ask people to write down the basis of it, because actually the quality of written communication is a really helpful leading indicator of what is going on mentally. The diagnosis of this within founders is crucial because it's a bit like parenting. As soon as you get used to one stage, it changes on you. Suddenly you're in a different stage, and it's fantastic. And all of this accretive knowledge I had just went flying out of the window, and now I'm back at square one. This is ridiculous.
Well, keep excelling, Tom, at the parenting and and others. As an interesting thing, the culture bees are so ingrained in Bird Island, we actually use them as the basis for our annual reviews, which I think it makes them, I find, like kind of fun to write too and to respond to.
It's a good annual reminder. And I think, there are so many ways in which I can kind of critique myself. I was trying to help everybody on the team. We revisit them less often than I think we should. At the very least, I find it really important when we kind of look across the team to see it refracted through those sort of 7 core elements. Because it's the other thing I also really like, that they are active, that these are all ways in which you can conduct yourself in the world. It means that they're literally just sort of, they're possible to do rather than the ones that are a bit more abstract, like vision or whatever.
When I'm picking up bar tabs in Singapore, I always remember be the fun and say, thank you, Tom.
Yeah, so. Be the fun for you and everyone else.
Keep going into the history. Like, everyone wants to know this, and we get asked all the time as your partners, but can you just tell us, where did the name Bird Island Ventures come from? And why was this an apt name for this company, what you're building? And then we'll know, because we get asked all the time too.
Well, it's funny. And we see this all the time in water when you're sort of naming a company, I think is a bit different from a fund. There are lots of the Silver Lake or New Mountain or like whatever. There's all these sort of things that are out there in terms of names, especially of funds, that I think are sort of like maybe, slightly hackneyed. It's usually kind of a color and a noun of some kind of physical thing. And maybe this sounds a little bit like it. So that was maybe a little bit of the breadcrumbs in. But it really struck me very, very early when I was just sort of setting up a LLC to do a couple of kind of personal investments. It struck me that if this was going to be something that I did as a job, you're going to use the name all the time. multiple times every day. And that it's worth taking some time over it. This should be very deliberate rather than just wandering into some, I don't know, whatever, the chemical physical property of water or whatever. And so I was like, well, what do I want to think about a lot every day? And I went through a whole list of things. And one of them was just like views I like. I'm a big view person. I really like sunsets and stuff. And I really like views. And I like climbing up places that have views. I just think awe is a wonderful sensation. And one of my favorite views in all the world is from a lay-by on a single track road that goes over the hill to the village where my grandparents lived when they retired and where my dad grew up, in a village in Western Scotland called Tinnabrook. And the view is down, there's an island called Bute, and the sort of the straits of Bute are called the Kyles. And in the mouth of the East Kyle of the Kyles of Bute are kind of three islands that stand sentinel. They've been watching the tide go in and out for hundreds of thousands of years. It's the most beautiful just image. It's on my background on LinkedIn if you're interested. And so I thought, Burnt Island, but that also sounds kind of cool. Let's do that. It sort of worked because people always ask us about it and they wonder whether or not we think the world's going to be on fire. And it was very confusing when we did an event with the Convective guys who were fund at Climate Week in New York last year. And we were called Burnt Island, but we were the water people, and they were called Convective, which is obviously convective currents, and they were the fire guys. And anyway, yeah, so it's not without its pitfalls. I feel very grateful that I've done it. It's very personal to me. One day we've all got to go and look at them so everybody will have a better point.
Well, we have been waiting for the invite, Tom, for the offsite.
Exactly. We definitely need to all go, but it will be covered in clouds. We'll see if we can find a clear day to go and have a look at the Burnt Islands. But it means a lot to me, which is very selfish.
That's the thing. That's why you start your own fund, so you can name it what you want to. So I feel like we started in the now, and then we kind of went back in time a little bit, and then we're going to project out to the future a little bit. We're now kind of the back end of the deployment period of Seed Fund 2, in the mid to early period of the Growth Fund, looking 5 to 10 years out, the crystal ball. Like, where do you see Burnt Island Ventures? Like, what do you see the collection of funds doing over the next 5 to 10 years?
Making extraordinary returns for our LPs is obviously the first one. The facts aren't in, but the reason why it looks like this is working and working well is that I think the basics are good. That the fundamental elements of what we're building this business on is observations about quality of the founders and the value of the deals we get to be a part of where we think the value is going to be once these companies are built, and the perception of value of the exit environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Only good things can happen if you just continue doing the same thing. If you focus on that swing, it's really going to rhyme with that. There are going to be other entrepreneurial opportunities for sure, but you've always got to marry the pursuit of entrepreneurial opportunities with the focus on what it is that you do. I think another way of looking at this is, how is the world going to change over the next 5 to 10 years? And we think water is unignorably compelling. Other people are going to find that out. And it might take 3, it might take 5, it might take 10 years, but other people are going to find that out. And so we're going to have to think very, very carefully. And I think we've already thought very, very carefully about our competitive position over time. This is why we use that 800-pound gorilla slide, is that, which was pretty, excuse my French, but ballsy at the beginning, when we said our job is to be the 800-pound gorilla. But I do think that we've done a reasonably good job of positioning ourselves at the seed stage. And I think we have the opportunity to do that at the growth stage. And it's good that we've done that, because the competition is going to get more intense. And so the answer to why us for a founder has to be really obvious. But if we're thinking about the kind of the tactics of it, look, I think it'll probably make a lot of sense to unify the seed and growth stage. I think overall, there is real power. People always talk about the specialists and then the kind of the mega funds. And that's the way in which the world is bifurcating. But there is a world in which you can become the mega fund of your specialization. And that actually having the capital in hand in order to be the principal determinant of whether or not your company wins, even though it may not look like people putting $20 billion to work or whatever the Vision Fund is about to do into OpenAI, it doesn't have to be that extreme for you to be able to really have very interesting positions on the cap table of very, very strong companies. And so I think that's a worthy goal to work towards, which is like building AUM for AUM's sake is a really, really great way of blowing up your fund, of just becoming crap. Because like usually the reason that happens is because of fee chasing. Hopefully we've shown that we're not fee chasing because we built a really big team. as we were building our AUM. We've been really good about maintaining our incentives in accordance with the carry. So we're very much aligned with our LPs. But so we'll never raise our AUM just because we can. But there is a really interesting opportunity, and I think it is within the next decade timeframe. If we do the work that we are going to do over the next 5 years, I think we're going to have a really good argument to be able to have quite a powerful platform for the enablement of the best founders, and ideally where they really don't need another generalist capital partner, that they can have their cake and eat it, that they can have a specialist that has the resources to be able to make their vision manifest without having to go anywhere else. Certainly, I think that would be quite a fun place to be. The decision-making's got to be good, right? You can't, because, you got to make sure you're very well-funded turkey on your hands. But that bit, I think we're okay with. So look, who knows? The world's going to change and you've got to play the game on the field. And the world is a very, very complicated place. And the nature of surprises is that they're surprising. It's certainly partially a deliberate strategy, but I think it's always important to try and be as emergent as you possibly can in the same way that we were with the growth fund. But I think our pattern of decision making so far has been good. And we just need to make sure that we carry on doing that as time goes on.
Well, Tom, that is great. And we are now nearing the end. So it's now time to get to that final question, the final question that you always ask that we now get to ask you at the end of this podcast. And here it is. If you had to choose one piece of advice for current and future water entrepreneurs, what would it be?
It's around the nature of the problem that you choose to work on. That actually, over time, people always talk about pivoting and that you can always pivot to something new. But the power of really understanding the nature of reality and either the pain or the piece of value accretion that you're promising with your startup from the very beginning. When you look at the stuff that's really worked, it's the people who have got that initial decision really right. What I would say is that as you're looking at your entrepreneurial idea, is to really look at the bones of it. Okay, this is a thing where people are very, very upset. But what is it around the thing? What is the nature of reality? And not to choose an example or whatever it is, but we just recorded the podcast with Barrett from Current Software. The current billing software is absolutely terrible. And $500 billion a year passes through utilities as entities within the US every year. That kind of mismatch is really, really, really strong skeleton for a company. And as you go through all the rest of the 31 companies that we are supporting, if you are looking for commonalities, to a greater and lesser extent, of course, like there are some things that have turned out to be more compelling than others, but it's something that we really look for and we are right to. We are absolutely right to. Being really clear about the diagnosis of the reality around your pain and really thinking through beating the living hell out of the idea before you apply time, treasure, and time is much more important than treasure. It's your one non-renewable resource. So you've got to make sure that you're not wasting your time on something. And it always amazes me that when you sort of see people coming up that really just haven't done this. There's lots of reasons why they haven't, but those who have, it is blindingly obvious. It's definitely one for the people who are at the beginning of their journey. So less useful for people who have already chosen it. But if you're at the beginning of your journey, be really, really, really clear about the quality of your why, both in terms of pain and value accretion.
Well done. Well, sir, thank you so much. It's a pleasure and inspiration to work with you on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
One of the things, obviously, going back to a culture B is be the fun. And I feel so glad every time we jump on the phone on Monday morning with all six of us. And obviously, our investment committees and our venture partners are exactly the same. But I just feel so privileged to work with all of you. And, sometimes they're easier than others. And I think that even when the times are, involve us really putting the pedal to the metal and working really hard, it doesn't get less fun because you two are absolutely phenomenal people to work. Our pleasingly complementary triangle is something that I feel really lucky about every day. So thank you to you.
And it's a pleasingly complementary hexagon with Marissa, Jenny, Jessica.
Exactly. Oh my God, do we have to turn BIV's logo into a hexagon? Maybe we need to. That was a story for another day. No, but I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for turning the tables on me and for going easy. I know that you could have brought my myriad shortcomings out into the world. So thank you for not.
That would have been very difficult, Tom.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting us invade your
No problem.
podcast. We appreciate it.
And
Thanks,
kudos
Tom.
off, Marissa, 50 episodes deep, and maybe we can do it again at episode 100.